In this video I'll be assuming two things. One, that Monster Hunter World was your first Monster Hunter, or you're just not completely familiar with everything that Generations and now Generations Ultimate will offer. And two, that you're probably well versed in the weapon that I'll be discussing, so this won't be a full-on guide, but rather a quick summary on the differences between the weapons in the two games.
What's the difference?
Hey guys, what's up? Right now I'm going to talk about the Gunlance. The Gunlance has always been kind of underused and underappreciated, but I'm happy to see it getting a lot more attention in World. First, let's talk about the new things. Not much of the moveset was changed, and there were only a couple of small additions. The first being this new high motion value sideswipe. It does a lot of damage and it's easy to work into most of your combos. And the other is the Worm Stake Cannon, which is also another nice finisher that you can work into your combos. So basically they gave it a nice new physical attack and a nice new shelling base attack. Aside from these new additions, the playstyle of the weapon is still relatively the same. However, there's a couple of things to consider. The first thing to consider is that the Gunlance and Gen Ultimate will have a heat gauge mechanic. You can increase the heat gauge with all of your shelling attacks, such as regular shells or full burst. Depending on where you are in the heat gauge, you'll be doing more damage, but be careful because you can overheat and then you'll lock yourself into doing less damage. There are ways to lock your place on the heat gauge by either using Wyvern's Fire or two of the Hunter Arts. World's iteration of Gunlance has everything you might need packed into one. However, the shelling type you want to use will have an effect on which style you pick in Gen Ultimate, as some styles will benefit certain shelling types more than others. Let's go over the styles. The first is Guild Style, which will be the all-encompassing style. Any kind of shell type will be supported by this, and any kind of playstyle will be supported by this as well. This would be a nice place to start for most Gunlance mains. The next up is Striker. Now Striker can be pretty good. It can bring 3 Hunter Arts, and Gunlance has some pretty solid Hunter Arts. And it has no slam or full burst, so you want to avoid normal shell types with Striker. But it's pretty easy to mix in shelling with your attacks, so Striker can be pretty solid with wide type shells. Next up is Aerial. Aerial is pretty interesting and kinda situational, but you basically do the aerial slam into the full burst, so this is a style that'll kinda favor normal type shells. Now Adept is a very popular style for Gunlance, and for this, I can just show you. The counter-based playstyle worked really nicely with Gunlance, and this style alone definitely gave the weapon some more attention. The counter leading right into the slam into full burst of course makes it favor normal type shells, but Adept style can still be viably used with pretty much any type of shell. And also works quite well with wide type, as aside from the counter you can mix in some regular shelling attacks, especially in a fight where you don't think you'll be able to spam the full burst as much as you want. Next up is Brave, which is interesting because you can use different shell types depending on how you want to play it. Once you get into Brave mode, you get a guard point, which is pretty cool, but the guard point reload leads right into the slam, which will let you full burst, but it also gives you the option to rapid fire shells. So depending on which shot type you like and which playstyle you want, you could use different shell types. And lastly is Alchemy,
Do a barrel roll!
which is similar to Guild with SP support, except it has a faster Wyvern's Fire, so that's something to consider. The first Hunter Art is Dragon's Breath, or Wyvern's Breath. What it does is that it locks your heat gauge at the maximum and also increases your shell damage. It's also useful because if you accidentally overheated, it can also undo this for you, which is pretty useful. Next up is the Blast Dash, which I just think is a really funny looking Hunter Art. You essentially rocket launch yourself and then do the aerial slam. You can also follow it with a full burst, so it's pretty good. It does good damage, but it's also an aerial attack, so it can get you a mount, which is pretty cool. Then there's the Dragon Blast, which is just a fixed damage Hunter Art attack. It's just another option for damage. And last was the one that it recently got, which is the Anti-Air Flares. It'll reload your Gunlance and then do an upwards full burst. And then, if your Wyvern's Fire is available, it'll use that too, and then reload your Gunlance again. The reloads that the Hunter Art is doing count as guard points, and the full burst that the Hunter Art does can't overheat the gauge. This means that this Hunter Art can max out the gauge, but then right after, lock it in place. So it's a solid Hunter Art overall. All in all, Gen Ultimate's iteration of Gunlance is very fun, and very strong. I know a lot of Gunlance mains were unhappy with the weapon in Generations since the entry was nerfing Gunlance motion values. You basically have to have a max out heat gauge just to reach the damage the Gunlance used to have. That being said, the weapon is still solid and offers a playstyle that really doesn't compare to anything else. If you're a Gunlance main in World, I think you'll have a pretty easy time transitioning over to Gen Ultimate, with a couple of things you'll have to get used to. But just like in World, the weapon is still a nice mix of defense and offense. I'm really surprised they didn't adapt to the counter-based style a bit more into World, since it was one of the funnest things that Gunlance had ever gotten. With that said, I hope I helped you to see the difference between the weapon in the two games, and I hope to give you an idea of what to expect and what to look for when you try it out in Gen Ultimate. Thank you for watching, and happy hunting.